Hey guys, I hope everyone is doing well and that you've had a great day today. Well, today's session is about extension. It's a hard machine, and I'm pretty sure you've been able to see the types of techniques that are involved in compromising it. So that's what we're going to be doing today. It's actually a retired machine. I think it was released back in 2022. It's a pretty decent machine. You can head over to Hack the Box and check out the write-ups, some of the write-ups that are available there. Um, yeah. So yeah, today we're about to start. We're actually starting right now. I'm pretty sure that while we continue, more people are going to join. So today we are having Claude taking us through this Hack the Box machine. It's a retired Hack the Box machine. Claude is actually a literal goat, especially when it comes to Hack the Box. You find that he's been able, in the last season, in season 9, he was able to take fifth place during that season, which is pretty impressive. And on the previous machine that was released in season 10, we're currently in season 10. In the previous machine, he managed to get first blood on user, which is really, really impressive because you know that it's not something easy to just achieve, especially on Hack the Box with the large user base that it has, with the number of CTF players that it has. It has a lots of people with a lot of experience. So he's really stood out in this field, and we really respect that. So I'd like to welcome Claude to take us through this session, and make sure to get something out of this. Make sure, because like I said, he's a literal goat. So because of that, make sure to try and pick his brain to understand his methodology when it comes to compromising machines, because this is really golden. This is something that you don't just get often. This is not your average Jew. This is a literal legend. That's what I can say. So yeah, let me welcome Claude. Claude, the stage is yours.
Yeah, it's can be. Yeah, can I be heard?
Yeah, you're audible.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you for the confirmation. So, allow me to share my screen. However, I can't share my screen because of the host.
Sorry about that. You should be able to share now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so everyone can see my screen.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So we'll begin by just getting a look around of the extension machine. So the extension machine is available for VIP members as it's retired. So it's a hard Linux machine that offers some basic groundworks into enumeration, some exploitation, and some very unknown vectors into properly using privilege escalation. They're not usually common within the field, but they usually tend to be there. The user blood and system blood is roughly around 14 hours to 16 hours, but I did not plan to consume all that time. So I prepared beforehand and can begin by starting the machine so that it can spawn. As it spawns, we can look at something like the relative difficulties that it is hard, but it's not that hard. It's relatively on the medium side of hard, but that's because most people who tend to come later will tend to have some form of assistance. That's why originally when you're looking at the difficulty, the first few hours of solves are usually more beneficial than the coming days because the first few hours is when you know someone really has tried their best as much as possible. So we can copy the IP and we can begin enumeration. So the first thing that we usually do in a scenario like this is run nmap and other network enumeration tools. Personally, for me, I run rastan, and this is just to it's a faster way of enumerating because it displays ports as it finds them. So you do not have to worry about which service is what. If you're accustomed to the service that is running, you usually know that 80 is just HTTP most of the time. Sometimes it can be used as a proxy in the scenario of like script proxies and such, but we can just call it so we know what we're dealing with. I put the -L because of this is more of a redirect follow. So this has run and it's only bringing out two ports, SSH and port 80. So we can be able to work with that knowledge in our hand. So when I run it with the -L, this is for location in the sense that in case it tries to resolve to a host name, it usually send a 302 redirect to us telling us this location has changed and so find it at x.htb. So we usually put -L so that in case it tries to resolve, it usually looks the host for me so that I can easily update it. But without it, that I will simply have to copy the IP and just put dash. When it will resolve now from here, you can see that it's resolving under snippet.htb, which means that the host name of most likely will some form of session to handle it. The domain is disclosed to us, so it's telling us, you'll be working under snippet.htb. So we can easily put this, then we can do sudo t append, let's see hosts. This just, it will append the host name into our host file so that for easy results and such. So you can see it here. You can just blue tail and check your etc hosts if you ever wish. It's a quick way of not opening it up, but it will be there. Once that is done, immediately I get a host name. I usually tend to look for other virtual hosts that may exist because depending on the tool that is being used, let me just call it session.md so that I can keep track. Depending on the tools that are usually being used, there's usually a proxy because the user sends a request. The request is intercepted by a proxy server, something like Nginx or Apache. Then this one will resolve the host name and send it and direct it where required. Depending on what server is usually working on. If you look at the workalizer, which will tell us, you're running Vue, Vue in connection with some bunch of libraries. But if you look at the host, it's telling us that it was able to get up.js, favicon, and some other things. But the response usually tends to disclose the server that is running us, telling us that what you do is an Nginx server of, I have a problem when I'm posting from a Java-based application with my session because of how it's drafted. Because of that, this will have to die, but I'll just bring it up quickly. So it's running Nginx around 1.14.0 on Ubuntu. Very quick understanding of what is expected and etc. etc. So you have an Nginx server that is utilizing some form of XSRF token. When you see XSRF token, this is usually common to Laravel based application. So most likely you're dealing with something related to Laravel, and you can, I'm not sure if, because I cannot seem to copy to here. So I'll save the item to just t1.request. Doesn't have to be anything. It will come here. Then this session is now its URL encoded as evident by the %3d here at the end. So that's just, yeah, that's just that. But it's not JWT because of the structure it is showing. We can try to decode it under base 64 and tells us this is the IV, so it's using some form of cryptographic scheme which has a mark which is just usually for signature validation, and there's another base 64 string which is also being passed. It's encrypted. It seems to be encrypted, and it is encrypted through this IV. Common cryptographic schemes under this, because it's IV, it belongs to use what we call symmetric cryptography, which falls under the family of AES, DES, etc., etc. This now will tell us that we will need something like an AES key or a key responsible for the decryption to be able to pass under these strings and such. But otherwise, it does disclose a lot of information just from looking at headers. The next thing that we will tend to do is enumerate the domain, the virtual hosts. Because of the nature of Nginx, it usually has a default resolve. This default resolve usually sends you, in case you are lost, it sends you to a default place. This default place is more of like a web page of similar. So in case, for example, I as an attacker looks for something like a.snippet.htb, if that is not an existing virtual host or one which is really hard coded into the Nginx proxy, it will send me to a default location. The same will happen for if I do something like B and it does not exist. But if I do something like C, someone else and it's interfering with my microphone. Okay, if I do something like c.snippet.htb and it exists, it will send me to a place, let's say called C, and C will have a different web page. Because we know very well that this two will be, this one too will be the same, but one will be different. We can filter on some status or the size of the web page or the number of words depicted. That's usually the logic behind web enumeration. So depending on what you like to use, preferably for me, I like FAF, which means faster you full for some reason. That's literally the legit reason. But for me, it's really hard coded. We have something like this. Yes, we'll give it the name of the default location that we usually begin, because that is the name we're given with snippet.htb. Then we will manipulate the host header, which is responsible of talking to Nginx, and tell it we want you to check on this item of fuzz. So given this particular word list or such, once we run it, the first few results usually have a lot of meaning. Like I was saying, if the thing does not exist, you tend to have the same web page, but it may change depending on whatever is being reflected back to the user. So when you find something like these themes, you have a status of 200, but this themes is being echoed within here. Then we have temp. Here temp is 37891. There's a difference of 3 characters between these two. And if you look very well, these are 3 characters. That means that most likely it's echoing back the host, trying to tell us something like whatever we're looking for, this things dot whatever does not exist. So we cannot usually go for something like this. So we look at something like the words or the lines. Preferably, I usually like words, because with words, the web page is somehow fixed and it really looks at a lot of things. So we can filter on something like words and tell it, you know, these best words. Like we do not want to see this 1022 words because we know they are going to the same place. Once we run, it usually starts, they are no more like bad output. So here we have new development. So we have new hosts which have been discovered, and we can add them into our hosts file. And then once they're added to the hosts file, we can be able to see what is this story about. And yes, and the dev.snippet. Sorry for the spoilers, but it's pretty much a retired box. There's not a lot of spoilers. It's because I had to prepare beforehand. So when we have what we have is roundcube godmail, which does not disclose a version, but if you can measure from the year this box was released, you can preferably look for roundcube webmail CVE. You can literally come from here, you'll find they're probably what, but I like the CV details one because it really has a arranged format for this and it holds. So anything beyond 2021 should not be seen, but rather focusing on 2023 and going below. There isn't much from this category, but if you look at the impact that it usually causes, from around 2023, we have one that resulted in command execution and another one which resulted in information leak. So we know very well that this roundcube allows remote code execution by authenticated user because the from parameter in a URL is not validated, which leads to PHP object deserialization. This is something that is formed based on how PHP objects are crafted within memory. And when it's unserialized, they usually tends to cause some form of command execution. So from usually this scenario, there's really not much that we can do because there's really not the exploit described, but I usually just like to highlight it and search within Google itself. Okay, so someone drafted this POC. There's even one from, I can just copy from the exploit DB. But I guess most of it will be either, yeah, it's authenticated because I would require a username and a password and the command to execute within the target system. So maybe we can come back to it later and see if it works and just clone it for the purposes. This sometimes you'll see something like size 0. Don't usually follow for it because it does not help anyone. But after some time, you'll notice that you usually need to have acquired results either within the first 2 minutes or so, depending on what, because they're usually easy to find. And that's just the entire gist of the scenario. Now, looking at this, we have registration, sign in, and we can begin with the explore. There's usually something within the Git. There's something called Git.ini. It's a configuration for Git. And one of those options is it requires sign in. That means that before you access resources such as Explore, Home, or what, you require to have signed in. And sometimes registration can be disabled such that you only have sign in. But once we click this, we don't have anything. We can click users and we notice that we have administrator, Charlie, and Jean. So if we open for them, we notice that here we do not have much. Yeah, we don't have much. So there's no organization sorted only for this users. So Jean, followers, what. She has at least no disclosed public activity from our end. And otherwise Charlie has the same. So we can come back to this particular endpoint and you'll see the professional team. So here we have Charlie, who is the designer. We have Jim, who is the CEO, and Theory, most likely with the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer. And we can instead try to log in and register so that we understand what may or may not be happening. So registration, we can put a, then just default things, just standard things to be fast, but then it says, whoops, something went wrong and the domain is invalid. So if we proceed to use snippet.htb, tells us that registration is not allowed in this moment. Okay, so we cannot register. We cannot register. So if we look at login, we can do something like does it disclose? I believe I have to register so that I sign in. We can register here and just type a bunch of things. Okay. And register and look at users again. This time it discloses the email address for each one of them. So you know that we have something like Charlie, snippet.htb. Sorry. Jim and administrator. Once you know you have those three users, then you know somewhere around these two will be invalid. So we can look at login. Login also has this. We can try something like Charlie and then we give it an invalid password. These credentials do not match our record. Then we can come here and try to do pip at snippet.htb. There was an error and therefore there were no valid recipients. What if I try to do someone that I know exists, like Jim, who is the CEO? We have emailed you a receipt link. And most likely there is some form of validation there. And this one speaks to the forgot password endpoint. So we have something like forgot password endpoint. And then we mostly that is usually more valuable. But otherwise, when we look at the base of the requests, when you access the first endpoint, you usually see how it's loaded. One of the things we see here is that scripts is used and it populates this constant variable known as Ziggy. If you were to search on it, Ziggy, something based on Laravel routes within JavaScript, such that it allows you to see the route function within it. Just a quick way. So we have routes. It discloses the URL that we are using, and it discloses routes based on that information. So it's some form of map we can use, because with an attacking point, you're supposed to understand as much as possible the groundwork of what is to be done. So we'll be able to copy, save this to a file, and then we just look url.requests, and you're able now to access this point. Because it's JSON, you can be able to just fetch the items. It's clean JSON, I hope. And then echo. Let me remove that. And yes, pipe it over to JQ, and now we can have forms of what we are expected to have within certain circumstances. So this can be just redirected to an output of urls.json, allowing us to evaluate it from this endpoint. Now, if you were to notice, you'll notice that we have this management dump, which is a really weird endpoint, but it accepts a post request. I will not go into much of this yet, but I will first disclose this, then we'll be able to proceed. So we have something that is used for dumping users or whatever is within the tables or something. Even within the database particularly may exist because of this management endpoint. Sometimes it can even be the memory, because there are some endpoints which I believe in Spring Boot, I will allow you to do that. And when it's taken into this context, the management dump can be seen if you are to call snippet.htb. Ignore that. You will see this. Notice that, oops, an error occurred, the method is not allowed. So we say, yeah. When we try to present it with post, we get a 419. A 419 usually page expired. In Laravel terms, a status for 19 is just code for page expired. This usually means that it's meeting the XSRF token, or the cross-site forgery token required. It's really missing it. There are two ways you can go about it. You can either, using your requests, you can simply copy them. You can copy these two cookies and use it to perform request, or you can come to something like get and see what was there. Notice that it also requires an XSRF token header matched to the cookie that is being provided, so that the session, which I think now maintains our session, can be validated. So we require to supply all of these things, and if you deal with the terminal like me, it usually becomes quite extensive to copy and paste. So what usually I do is, because I know the very homepage should have or set those cookies, what I do is I look at something like snippet.htb, then I tell it to save the cookies to a file. Yeah, so sorry for that. Let me delete this. It's the same thing, but then all the output, I'm not interested in the output, I was only interested in the cookies. I send it to the null. That means that I am not interested to see. -s is just to silence this output. But otherwise, if we read the cat cookies.txt, you notice that it sets them for us, such that you see here that HTTP only is set to false, and for the snippet session, and it's also set to false for the XSRF token. So having that sense of understanding, we know that this is just a cookie file. It can be used instead of having to supply all these arguments. It's usually used like this. This time we can management dump, and then change the method to post. Then b uses the cookies within it, but it will still fail because, like I explained, we also need to set this header to this value. So that usually just becomes the only part that needs to be validated or processed in such a manner. Now, when we have that, we can fetch whatever we want. You can just do it like this, token. Then we read the cookies. Then we select the sixth item or the sixth line. It's usually just records. At cookies.txt, we select the sixth line. So this is the first line, second line, third line, fourth line. There's a line break here, fifth line and sixth line, because this is what contains XSRF token. So we select the sixth line and we print the seventh item. That means that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is what we're actually interested in. Well, depending on whatever you use to decode, I can supply URL and code. It's actually a tool written in Rust, if I'm not mistaken. I don't fully remember why I got it, but I usually got it in my escapades. And yeah, so we have that. And if we echo token now, you'll notice that now it populates it in this particular variable. So now that if we do this and supply the XSRF token, I have to change this to double quotes so that the variable can be populated. And then we run it, you will get, you will see that the XSRF token is populated. And then we run it, you will get, 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 maybe the cookies expired in there. Let me fetch fresh ones and see. Otherwise, it still says, or I must have populated it wrong. Yes, yes, it's XSRF token. A lot of work. But okay, it's because they are different. Sorry for that. Once we format it correctly, it should tell us a bit more on what it expects. It's telling us that, yes, what you're looking for will have missing arguments. That means it expects data in some form of way. When we're dealing with API endpoints, in API most of the time usually trained to speak the content type of JSON. That is one of the things. So we'll come here and say, oh, we'll give you the content type of JSON. It's expecting it in a form, and the data example. Still bring out the same message, but we're not actually fully interested because I was just drafting it for sending it to the proxy. I want to send it to the proxy, mainly sends on 8083, such that if I come here, proxy, the history, you'll see that it moved the post management. I can save it to a file because it's really written well. So I can just save it to a file and call it the base.request because it's the base request of what we'll be doing. So having the base request in place, we can have here fuzz because we'll be using faf to check. So here I can just do x fuzz and then x, and then we can fuzz for this parameter to see if it requires any particular endpoint. So faf does take a request, and because it's a base request, it takes the protocol of HTTP. If you do not specify this, it will use HTTPS by default. So we need to shift the protocol of the request to HTTP because we are speaking to port 80, else it will always use HTTPS. The word lists use a share, word lists use a share, sec lists, and then discovery, web content, BAP parameter, names.txt. Then once we have this, is the parameter that we want to fuzz is already in fuzz, so fuzz is smart enough to know that once we run this, it will have a bunch of things. It will have response status, it will ignore, some that it will match, but I want to match all the status codes because this is not a very much informative sentence given by the API endpoint. So we'll match all status codes, even the 400 ones. We will filter on the rejects of missing arguments because that seems to be common. Even if we do something like, let me remove this. We do something like x is to 1, it will still say missing requirements. So you know that will be the wrong thing. This filter just removes them. So once we do that, we can let it run. Yeah, we can let it run for a while and hopefully we'll hit something. Yes, we have hit something at first, the method endpoint, which was an indicator of how it was. As it goes, we can play around with it because I was interested with how it behaves. It can change the method as it goes. Method, and then we do this X. So we send it and it seems to say for 5 method not allowed. So it was looking at the definitive property of the request and it is being fetched from the body, which was weird because as we're sending a post request, it should be allowed. We change it to post, we notice that now it says missing requirements. It sends back missing requirements. Here, as you can see, we have now hit download, but now instead of we've gotten 400, but instead of missing arguments, we've gotten something else, which if we change this and do post, it will tell us that this is an unknown table name. So it has changed in a manner. So I can just close it here because this is what we have. I can close it there and switch to downloads. Then in the sense of the base request, I can, because I now know what I am looking for, I just don't know where it is. I'll simply change this to files. Then we'll run the same thing again, but now this time because it's changing on unknown table name, we will remove all the requests that have this one. Sorry, has to be exact because it's case sensitive. Once we run this, we should be able to expect to at least get some few results of the item, I guess. I am in an infinite loop. Okay. So hopefully I'll get something based on this regex expression. It's just simple, like match, remove whatever you find with this message. So it strips out all anything else. But otherwise, in the context of being fast, I think we're doing good timing. It's what comes next that is quite, honestly, it was a headache to get it to work. I had to do it as something else. It's what comes next. Because it drains time and it requires a bit of probability logic. It's not exactly pure probability, but rather it requires a bit of understanding with how probability works. This is why sometimes some of these solutions that come usually require big brain solutions, and they tend to be matched or something. So as this goes, as it continues, I think it also required luck because of what I did. Honestly, it required a bit of luck in order to fully get it working and load up whatever next, because this is just a virtual private server I usually have, doesn't disclose anything. Just I use it to crack hashes and host some things. So let's say you have hashes. It's better to just use SCP to copy them and so etc. But you can just paste. It's not configured for hacking because it's not meant for hacking. I just abuse that single functionality, as Hyperland had issues when it comes to. Oh, so we have hit profiles. So we can come and check profiles because it says that it is not a lot. It just says 2 lines. But otherwise, you see the size is 2. We get nothing from the database. We have downloads and we get nothing else. So as it continues to run, there's still 900 things to check also. Good thing about fuzz is that it uses multi-threading to send multiple requests. And so we are able to identify and hit particular endpoints, etc., etc. Also, we have hit users. We can look at users and see how it goes. It has a bunch of users in JSON format. See that it stores a JSON array. This is a JSON, this is a bracket, a square bracket that is a JSON array. That's how you know it's a JSON array. And it seems to be storing JSON items of a remember token together with their passwords and their emails. So me, I'll be interested in email and the password item. So once you do something like this, you can do curl, and because we have, did we do it here? Yes, we did it here. We can do download and do users. Yes, it's loading. It's a lot of data. Then we tell it the data that we have. The data that we have is JSON, so we would like to format it. The first thing I'll do is, because of these square brackets, the object I'll reference it, I'll tell it I want to enter inside the array itself. So now I'm in the array. Then I tell it for every single one of those items, I'd like you to fetch 2 things. I believe it will be email, and I'd like you to fetch the password. This is how you reference the current object with a single dot within you use GQ. So you have something like this, I believe so. And now it will have them in this and this format. I believe so. Then I'll tell it, I want you to join it. I believe join those two items using I'm not fully sure of this format. Yes. And we'll join those two items using either a comma or what, but because I want it in a format I can crack, I'll do dash. Then towards here, I'll use dash R to get rid of the quotes at the end, because dash R tells it we want the content inside and not what is enclosed within quotes. So once that is run, you should be able to get it in a form that you can extract it to a file called hashes. Then run hashes because this just SHA-256. You can notice from the length. You can always guess from the length, but I have named that hash that tells, yeah, most likely we're dealing with SHA-256. And it allows us to specify it and run. Oh, yeah. We'll just run it, dash A. Is there a mode? Yes, hashcat needs mode because it matches a lot of things. Hashes or Q. Oh yeah, dash is anyway. To generate bitmap tables. I should not be doing this on my machine. Let me see the size of this data and export it. So that it's even GPU intensive most of the time. That's why it's usually favorable. Exhausted. Most of those hashes will exhaust themselves because when it comes to SHA-256, it's usually very fast. So if I cut hashes and I count the number of lines, there are around 895 hashes that needs to be cracked or tested against it. But because it's usually fast, I don't know how many it has done. Maybe I just kept it here, but I can let it go for a while and hopefully we'll have results. So are there any questions? Look at the chat.
Yeah, there was actually a question by Sage. Yeah, Sage was just asking what text editor you're using to write the notes.
This is Z. It's Z. It's Z.
And as well, someone was asking what you're running, like what OS you're using.
Oh, this is actually Linux with Hyperland on top of it. It's Hyperland. It comes in Debian. It comes in it comes in a lot of flavors. It's really good because it's meant for Wayland. I believe so. I usually use another one of another guide because it's more suited for installation when it comes to installation purposes. It automates everything, but in short, this is Hyperland itself that makes it looks like this because under normal circumstances, most people run GNOME. That's why I usually have that aesthetic feeling or what, but this is really just Hyperland. You can customize it in so many ways, but it comes from this. If you can find the one for installation, good. But otherwise, this is just normal Arch Linux on Hyperland. And this is running a lot.
There was also another question by He Who Remains. Why did cracking refuse on Hyperland?
Oh, okay. There was something because of the way it's it's developed, Hyperland usually tends to rely on GPU. It's meant for GPU purposes, but because I'm on a laptop, it's not. It defaulted to my CPU. So based on the instructions of Hyperland, it usually initiated a thread lock on the CPU, in the sense that if I try to run CPU intensive applications such as Hashcat, which requires some tools from my CPU in order to initiate the threads, generate the bitmap, it tends to fight or be within a deadlock situation with Hyperland itself. So it's requesting a resource while waiting for another resource, etc., etc. Now it's had that issue, but I think we fixed it because as you can see now, this is running, it's running, it's running, it's running. I have no idea where we actually are. So I'll look into hashes and maybe there's something. That's not a good idea if it's hanging. Or is it? I can't really tell. It may hang. No, it has not yet cracked any. But because I had cracked it before, there's no need to do this. So I just because this is a new file, John is seeing everything here is new. Let's see if I exported the right thing. I can cut hashes, then I tell it to print only the hashes. So there's space, there's no space. So there's no space, and just tell it to print the second item, which is the hashes. Then we can sort on the unique items. And judging from this, you can notice that it is sorted. Yeah, we have a bunch of things. I can throw it at crack station and hopefully something comes out. Let me see. Because in real sense, cracking hashes is a skill-based thing. John usually cracks for me, so I don't waste a lot of time, but sometimes it also misbehaves. Try and find, it starts at 0, 0. Okay, let's check crack station. Then up to 20 hashes. So unfortunately for us, we fork and we tell it's up to 20 hashes. So the number of records should be 20. Yes. So we give it that and we see, because there are a lot not found, unknown, are there of these unique hashes, because there are around 892. I'm wondering if Hashcat has cracked even one. None. This is consuming a lot of time. This is why the machine took 15 hours. Well, this is not even the bad part. It's what comes after is actually the bad part. So I think, like I said, sometimes it's also luck. So I can give it the, because we saw they're around 892, so 872, and we paste those. We will get something. So you split work, you tell your friends, crack this part, I'll crack this part, etc., etc., etc. But for me, I'll skip the thing, but it can crack. Given enough time, it will crack it. It's just that it's consuming tremendous amount of time. So for me, I'll look for the user I used. So this user, I used this user. I got this user called Lateral. So when I threw Lateral's hash, not I threw Lateral, John somehow cracked it. It cracks to a password of 123. You'll end up with this password of 123. John cracked it for me, and now it's misbehaving, or it's just refusing, but it had essentially cracked for me. Once that is cracked, we can test out against the authentication form later, and then password of 123. This one, like, I skipped a part. I just want to save some time. But otherwise, you are sent to some form of board. And we notice that we have browse snippets. One of the things we usually have to look is JavaScript get clipboard. This allows us to get the clipboard of the user. This is just someone's code of allowing us. Seeing here that they are appending an integer to the final end, we can try an insecure direct object reference, which is idle, and see that here, once we do this one, we have Gitea API. Gene is telling us, oh no, you're not supposed to view this. That means most likely we do not have the necessary qualifications for viewing this. So we either have Gene. I think it will be more realistic to acquire the Gene user rather than any other user such as Charlie or the administrator, because Gene is supposedly issued by Gene. So we'll proceed, but depending on the structure also, you may not, okay, it just depends, but otherwise we'll proceed to look at, we'll try to reuse the credentials and see if they're also valid. See, I'll just paste them there on my keyboard because I was testing it around, blah, blah, blah. With snippet.html, password. Let me see. Yeah, password 123 works. Maybe I just copied the wrong thing. But otherwise, it allows us to log in into the template. And when we log out here, then we log in, then we go to forget password. We saw that it's doing some form of enumeration or some form of validation against the email and allowing it to send it to the right users. So we say email password reset link, and then we see it loading. Then we tell you we have emailed you your password reset link. So when we come here, we do that, then we do this, we'll get reset password notification. So we end up with a code that is set to expire in 5 minutes. This is where now there is magic. If you look at this code, it's a hex-based structure. Hex usually takes the form of, if you're good with regex, you notice that it takes the form of 0 to 9. That means from 0 to 9, just from 0 to 9. Or it occupies from A to F. In small case, that's why you usually have 0 dot dot until 9, then you have A, B, C, D, E, and F. This is usually just the standard base of writing regex. If you are familiar with that, you notice that most hashes tend to also look like that structure, because with hashes, there are bytes that are not directly printable to the user or can be seen by the user. But if we echo something like this, then we see W-C and we count the number of characters, we'll end up with 35. If you're experienced with how hashes worked, most algorithms are 32 bytes. We usually rely on a power of 2 to the power of something. Just know it's that. Most of them will find that 2 bytes, this is 2 to the power of 5, you'll do 64, which is just 2 to the power of 6, etc., etc. But you will never find a hash that usually looks in this form. So if we send another one, just to observe the behavior of the second one, we wait, yes, it has sent. We come drafts again, and then this one, the second one. You notice that also this is also that 5. But if we leave them on top of each other, you'll notice that something is matching for these two hashes until a certain point. So we have this, it matches, it matches, it matches. Even the highlighter can show because it's there. But once we reach there, it breaks. It usually breaks. So it means that these last three characters are the different parts of it. Something is being added to them, but otherwise this is a constant. And from experience, when you have constants like this, it's usually derived from a certain value from that user also. So it's either derived from their email or their username, and then it's added into them. That's why it's really very, very important you get as much information from the user as possible because it comes from a unique value from that user. You cannot use something like a name, like first name. Most people will match on the first name, so it will be useless. So you need either something that is unique to the data, such as a username, or the email. Yeah, most of the time it's username or email. And if we look at text and give it the first bit that we assume is not, it will tell us that most likely we're dealing with MD5. So using we'll start with the username and then we'll do MD5 sum. Notice that it doesn't match and we can append the domain and match, and yeah, we have what we desire. We have what we desire. So we know very well that it's just appending the last. Here we have, it's a digit. This is just regex of 3 characters. It's just digits of 3 characters. So we have from 000 till 9999. So it's only appending those 3 characters. That understood, we can come to this. We can come to now to this particular endpoint so that I explain a bit before we start. Once we forget a password, once we post forget password with the username, we will receive a 302 line find. And from that 302, we can follow the code. You can follow it later to the get forget password, which tells us that we have emailed your password reset link. But it does not matter. For as long as this exists, we'll always get the right thing. It's what usually comes after that is exactly the problem with the scenario. So if we open this with snippets and we give it password 123 and password 123, you can now click reset password thanks and tell us your password has been reset. So when it sends us this password has been reset, you can be able to view from this. Notice that we will send the token that is required. We send it with the email that we hope to change the password, and we send it with the passwords and its confirmation. When it has it is received, it will send us a status with your password has been reset. So that is usually the gist of it with the scenario of what we are going to. Now what we are going to do is we're going to target a user such as Charlie. I'll use Charlie for now because of later, you still need to, it doesn't matter. So I can use the June and it does not matter because Charlie is some form of designer. June is my order of priority because she's the CEO and she has what will be the API usually targets June first. So we wrote some tools here. This is the reset fuzz, which will allow us to send. So we'll change this to June, then we'll send it in batches of 1,000. What we'll do is we will send it 1,000 times. We will spam the endpoint 1,000 times. Therefore, by spamming it by 1,000 times, you will increase the probability of chance of existing within like this small range. E.g., you know very well that whatever is being appended is within this range. By spamming it 1,000, if you are to hit an endpoint, let's say 8 to 1 or 3, there's a higher likely chance that you will end up with a success if you append it to the end. There's a higher likely chance. And even if you do not hit 823, if you move to 823 to something like 840, you'll even have a higher chance of probability of hitting the chance. So by hitting 1,000 points, you're just increasing the chances of hitting the correct integer value that requires to be added to the hash or to the MD5 some string. So that's technically the gist of it. And if we look at here, there are some headers I had to specify. This needs to exist, X inertia set to true, and the version also needs to exist, and this X requested with parameter, so that you can return a JSON object. Sometimes it's just an error trying to understand and see why when we request with either curl or faf, it's behaving differently. But you can also do that. Also, there was the thing that if you hit it for 5 times within a certain duration, then you're most likely to be rate limited. That also became a disadvantage within this scenario. Rate limited for like 60 seconds. So we usually had a very expensive wait. Like 5 seconds, you wait for 5 seconds before they send you the next request. So this is that rate limiting was only applied to the reset password endpoint and not to the forget password endpoint, which now allows us to send multiple requests. So with that notion, I'll do it the reset further. It's set at gym. So password reset or reset further. We send this first. The other one will come later. So it will send those a bunch of 302 directs. These are just status codes stemming from this code. Derive the cookies, fix CSRF issues, then export the ads so that the subshells can see them. This is something that then fire curl with whatever is being sent. But otherwise, it uses Zags. Zags is more of a parallel tool. So it's usually sending like 20 requests per second. So this is all being done in 20 seconds, 20 requests per second. Therefore, it's fast. So once it's 1,000 requests have been sent, we now target the password reset, which if we target Gene, we can easily set. I'll choose a small range of 900 to 999 and do it reset, password reset. Yeah. So that we can just run it one. Yes. The password has been reset. Luckily, we've hit it on the first try. And we can come here and log in and say gene snippet.html. Yes, so we are able to log in as gene. So that's generally the entire thing, because you just have to draft the thing to be sent, because we're targeting the reset endpoint and we'll provide it with the right headers. I told you the meaning of this. We'll send it the email that we're trying to get access to, the full token that we have drafted, because the full token comes from the MD5 sum, added the integer bit. That's why this has an integer bit. Then once that is done, it resets the password to password123, and fetches the status. If it is not invalid, then it tells us, yes, you have hit the token. You have successfully reset that password. So it's about scripting, and it's also about saving time, because this is a very scripting. This was not easy, because I remember it took me like understanding why this was not showing JSON object, playing around with Laravel and such, etc., etc. So when we come to snippets, we can find here that, oh yeah, I have my snippet here, Gitea API, and I am giving it to this. So this is for the Gitea endpoint, because I also have to validate this. So we have a GET request being sent to API version 1 for the tokens, and we're providing this. If you're aware with how authorization header works, it really has forms. It has the bearer form, it has the basic form. The basic form usually takes a base 64 input of username and the password. Just to know that most of the time when you are dealing with basic APIs and you do call-u, you see something like this Tomcat. This will just be 64 this and then send it with a basic form. So with this, we can just echo and decode it, and you'll find that yes, we were right on nearly the entire thing. So this is usually just username password. So we know very well G as a password of this, and we can now go to this particular endpoint and sign in. Because we had already signed in, we need to sign out. Sign in comes with this and provides Jim's credentials, sign in, etc., etc. And we notice that they have a repository. Usually we just find it here. We find that yes, they have a repository and it's set to private. This is why we cannot at all see anything from the explore page. And they tell us it's an issue preview. This extension is designed to aid views. It will display the body of each issues on the main page of each issue on the main issue page in Git. So members of our team are already using it to track issues on internal repos. Most likely that means that it's giving us a hint. Let's just do that. It's giving us a hint on someone else using this extension. And if we download it, you can just click here, download it. And then you note that it fetches from the name, the repo, then archive master.zip. Then it will send it in form of this body. So we know that a particular endpoint can be used to fetch it. Once it's downloaded, once it's downloaded, we can move it. Move downloads here, then unzip extension here, and then we see. We'll just see inside what it looks like. So the first thing we usually look at when it comes to extensions being used is the manifest.json, because it is a guide of what is internally being used. It's an issue preview. It's used to preview Gitea issues. Then content scripts is usually what is run. Most of the time, the background also can be run here. So it tells us match anything with issues. So it has an endpoint. It will execute when this thing is met. That means that whoever is accessing previews or uses it or access the slash, anything that ends with slash issues. So that means that most likely, if we come here to the issues repository, because of the nature of this, you notice that it's doing Jane extension and then issues. You note that whatever comes here, the protocol doesn't matter. And for as long as it ends with issues, that means the person just sees issues. It will automatically fire any script that is being used. So it's doing injector.js. And if we come here now, this is whereby most things are usually occurring. Defines a bunch of constants, a list, so it fetches a list of issues. Then it fetches them from this element. Then for every single one of those items, it fetches the repo and the path name. So it fetches the issue from this particular, I believe this is, yeah, it fetches the repo and everything else and the path name. Then it fetches that URL. Once it fetches the URL, it sets the body of that parameter. Then we have the limit of 500. This must be something related to length, so it's that it does not exceed that length or cause issues with rendering. Then it finally sets the body. Then it checks the body, ensuring that it does something. Then from there, it appends into the inner HTML. That means it writes the body to inner HTML. Once you start manipulating DOM objects, document object model, once you start manipulating the DOM objects, you usually prove yourself to HTML injection in a sense, because HTML injection allows you to insert arbitrary tags. That means random things for HTML. One of the things as you allow yourself to HTML injection, CSS injection is also prone, and JS injection is also viable depending on something called the CSP, the content security policy. The content security policy is defined for websites to prevent execution of unrequired code or something that is maliciously injected within the DOM object. Because the CSP determines what to be executed, it has the ability to constrain what not to be executed. That means it decides completely this should not be executed. Sometimes you meet very strict CSPs if you perform CTFs, and you meet one such as you're not even allowed to inject JavaScript. So you have to use a combinations of HTML and a bit of logic to reroute things. Most of the time, I find it's JavaScript which really blinded, and you have to learn this. So because of the content security policy, if we were to look at dev, we notice that it's not setting any content security policy. It's usually set as a header. Because it's not setting it, this is usually easy for XSS. So that's usually the first thing to note. The next thing that we can note is this function called check. We see that they're removing tags, but this is lazy binding. In regex, whenever you do some things called lazy binding, let me show you. And this thing is still running, it can run. When you perform things called lazy bindings or lazy removals, because this is replacement, this is how we usually replace. We're telling it replace anything that with this form with nothing. So if you to do something like this and tell it anything with tags should be replaced. So anything that's match, let's say anything with tags that matches. But then if we do a second one, if we do the closing one, we usually have something like this. And I think it's because of this G. This G is the one which is messing us up, because let's remove it. If we don't have it, it will only match the first character. It matches as few as possible. And without the global flag which is being set, it will only ever match the first tag. Because this is the structure, it's telling us it will match as few as possible. If you want it to match everything, you just remove the question mark. But if you put the question mark, you're only matching as few as possible. There are two ways to resolve it. Then if you set the global flag, it will match everything. So because of not having a global flag and having this question mark, you're matching as few as possible. So things like A, then if you put image, but to be honest, let me see. We put image things that usually something like line breaks, because I'm pretty sure they have BR then dash. They don't need a closing tag. You can easily just bypass it by introducing a simple line break at the beginning, and then whatever comes after can be as tags. But we have a filter also. This is a whitelist or a blacklist. It's a blacklist because the filter checks, and if any of these things are present, it will automatically return a null string. So in the scenario that we have something of a blacklist, we are not allowed to use this. But the nature of string objects in JavaScript is that string objects are immutable. They cannot be changed. Because of them not being able to be changed, A and is not the same as A. They're not the same at all. They're not the same at all because of the nature of their representation. Therefore, we should understand that HTML, JavaScript itself, JavaScript strings, string functions are case sensitive, while HTML is case insensitive. HTML does not really care how you call your tag in terms of case. uppercase, lowercase combination, it does not necessarily matter, because at the end of the day, a script tag is the same as a script tag, is the same as a script tag. Doesn't really matter to HTML. All of these are the same, but to JavaScript, no, not the same. They're not the same at all. So because of that scenario, we can just to easily bypass these things as CRC and the script region, we can be able to just simply use case insensitivity. Now the problem comes because we need to execute JavaScript. JavaScript borders on execution. Because we need to execute JavaScript and we're looking for XSS, most people will think, oh, just grab cookies. But if you look at this dev, it usually has a cookie here. And you see that it sets it to HTTP only. This means that cookies can only be propagated or used when you're performing HTTP requests. HTTP requests have a standard and they are issued by agents. But the way the XML thing behaves, not necessarily. But JavaScript itself does not act as a HTTP request. Therefore, cookies are not or can never be accessed when this flag is set. If we do document.cookies, document.cookie, you will find nothing. Despite us, when you look at your memory, you'll find them being set because the HTTP only flag has been set to true. You cannot access those cookies using JavaScript from any standpoint. So the question begs to ask, what are you supposed to do then? In the scenario that we perform these HTTP requests, the cookies may also be propagated using them because they'll be treated as part of the HTTP requests by search functions. We have functions such as fetch. We have functions such as XML HTTP requests, which is usually old school, and people like IPsec who love it. But if you were to look at the standard of the nature, you'll notice that the fetch is usually more modern. It's usually more modern depending on how the nature of what you're looking for. So the first thing to do is to draft a template or a payload to hold on to. So we know very well that it will skip the first thing. So we can just put a line break and a line break. Then since it's scripting on line breaks, we can put next thing we can put is the image. The image tag is usually meant for usually special in a way related to the DOM-based object, because when you load a web page, most of the functions can be initialized, but for an image, it has the capability of changing with time. So it's usually given some form of free room for it to breathe and change or mutate with time. So when you are introducing XSS to some certain tags, the image tag is usually more preferred because of the free room that is usually given by the web browser. Because sometimes images mutate. You'll find someone has put maybe a rotating profile of images, or you have a slider that is constantly moving and updating images. So it's given some form of breathing room. So we have C, and then we put a capital R, then we put S, C. Then we set it to something that does not exist, X. Once you put it to X, it will try to resolve. Under here, it will come here, whatever it's looking for, then it will append X. If it does not meet the X, it will create a 404 status page, which usually is an error to the browser. So the browser sees that error, and then we tell it, in case you get an error, which we expect it to do, it is not filtered from the inject.whatever, so we can just put it like this form, and there's no equal sign, which is usually being filtered. So in case you get an error, we want you to run something for us. So we tell it eval, then I'll just close it early. Then here is the problem. brackets are being rejected. We cannot use single quotes, we cannot use termination brackets. So what do we usually tend to rely on? The good thing about JavaScript is that if you read its documentation, you'll be well versed with its understanding. So assume a to be this function allows you to convert from base64 to the normal ASCII text. So it will be just converts you from base64 to the normal ASCII. So this is one. This is just a string I usually have in memory that I usually just know. But I know it's usually for basic testing. So once I know that usually works, you would understand that we don't usually even need the brackets, because if you introduce backticks, they can act as these particular holders. They can act themselves as the brackets for closing, and when you run, the string is not properly encoded. It calls, let me remove this, let me hope, yep. And you'll notice that it still decodes because it brings whatever to come forward as the argument to be passed to A to B. Another way to do it is to use the call method. Because the call method is also a function based, it will have to be passed in this manner. A to B call, I believe. No, this is illegal invocation and we can only accept anything. And I believe it will only accept this or some method. But I believe eval usually has it easier. Eval has it easier than whatever is coming forward. So this is just a string. But I believe eval should work regardless of A to B. If we pass it A to B, then we use, also it can be able to dereference hexadecimals. That's why most sometimes people just use, to bypass, they just use hexadecimals. And if you were to, I don't know if I should stop this or maybe just let it go on. If we were to echo something, we usually do dash n so as to not append a line break at the end. If we don't do dash n, it really has disastrous consequences. If I pipe it over to XSD, you'll notice that it's OX28. It's just OX28. If we echo the closing brackets, you'll notice it's OX29. In terms of ASCII, OX28, OX29, and if you convert those to ASCII objects, they're just like this. They're just those two. Eval is, or strings, I believe it's strings that they're smart enough to understand that this is a opening brackets, this one is a closing brackets. So if I was to do something like eval, then I open this up, I say A to B, then because I know very well they're not allowed, I'll introduce hexadecimals. Then I say whatever is inside this, evaluate it. When I run it, you notice that it's passing this object to eval or whatever. So whatever is being annotated, but then because of the nature of how it has to be, it is only draft. You can just do this just to see its behavior. Syntax invalid unexpected token, because it always creates a temporary file. But generally that is eval, then x28, x29, maybe it's trying to, it's this 64. Yeah, I believe it's a string. I'm the one who's making a mistake here. this. I'm curious because, okay, there's no problem. But generally, this is like the payload structure I'm aiming for. Something around this. Oh, I think I've seen the problem. I'm using both of these and just all because this is also a string, I believe so. Yes, because this is a string. I believe the issue was that it could not directly represent the string and it had issues validating it. So, because I believe also this should work, but this needs to be escaped. This needs to be escaped. I'm curious on this behavior. Okay, so doesn't necessarily see this entire thing as a string. It's just awkward behavior. I have never considered it like this. So it's missing something in the template. And so it sees this. So this can be a good payload. So we have something like eval that will run this base64 string that inject here, and then it will be able to be given into this. So from here, I'll just come here and write something called x.js. I'll just write xss.js. This is the code I want to run on, that. Let me just even close it. And so hopefully I am not bothering. It takes usually long to get user because of the nature of things. But once we get this part, I'm pretty sure it will become much, much simple. So for me, I usually like IPSec, I believe calls it something like a cradle to hold. It comes before the script itself. For me, I usually like denoting this, creating this first, because this is what will be fetched. It will trigger a fetch to a remote file if it will trigger a fetch to a remote file. If there was a content security policy that prohibits from fetching remote files, then I would fit everything into one file and send it with that file. But I usually find it an ugly mess, and every time I have to prepare the entire thing again and again and again. So I find this easier. So we let the script tag be document.create new element. Let's create an element of the nature of a script. Then we tell the script tag your source will be found within this particular IP address. I believe mine is 15.2. Then I tell it the file that I want it to look for, which is x.js. Then once it's done, we tell it I want you to append to the head. To the document, the head of the document, the DOM object, I want you to append insert nodes after the last child. Interface adds a node to the end of the list of children. Does not matter, I believe so. Script, I want you to append this. It's really a very short cradle. Doesn't even take much. Easy to prepare and will not waste my time. So once we run that, we put it now where we expect this thing to be. And then now, because you always need to test your payloads, especially when you're dealing with shenanigans such as this, you need just to test the payload. So from here, I'll open up a HTTP endpoint. This is just a binary that I had that I used to do things with. It's just used to extract data files. It's a quick thing for maneuvering. You can write your own, but it's just mine. So we can run this, and then we see that it has gone through. We see that it has fetched x.js from our request. So that means our payload is correct. And this x.js now will contain our actual payload. Our actual payload, or what we expect. So from this one, I'll fire my notes. Just some things on machines. No. I was researching some best things. So I'll fire my notes and then I'll let it go until that point. This is the attacker host. This is the attacker host or HTTP address. So this address, yeah, I had forgotten about the content type. But this is just functions that send data to an endpoint so that my server accepts data to be in this format, which will send data in that format. I can be able to send files to my endpoint using that format, etc., etc. So I can use this script to extract data from particular endpoints and send it to my server, and my server will validate them, etc., etc. So the first thing I'll do is I'll take I will let data is fetch crude data. I believe it's crude data. No, it's JSON data. Because the API version 1 that we saw, I told you API speaks JSON. We will have certain endpoints. So if we do http dev.snippets.html, API version 1, I believe repos such. You can just look it here because the API is usually shipped with Swagger, usually just shipped with T. We can look at this value, but I never found any interesting CVEs, so I will not want to waste time. If we look at repos search, it would search for report stories, and if we do not provide it an argument, then try it out. Let's try and accept JSON, blah blah blah. So it does send the repos, then it comes back as JSON. So because of that, I will simply take this, and then if because of how the data is returned, I will pass it over to a promise. It's a promise object. It returns a promise object. And that promise object usually needs to be awaited and such. So I believe it's data, then data dot hmm, hmm, we'll use JSON. I believe it's just data. I don't think it's anything else. Then send data, then you give it data. Then it will send it correctly. So once again, I can close that. Don't need it. We can evaluate this and see if x.js comes with anything. So it received a promise. I believe my problem with mine has an exfiltration. I have to resolve this promise into something. I still don't fully remember what I resolved it towards. Mm-hmm. Mm. Is JSON response, then the way I understand it, this is a promise object. Because of that, it needs to be validated. Um, mm, let me see. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Now wait for a year without this function being asynchronous. I've never noticed. I don't think that's the problem. I don't know. Let me ask this this thing. I'm pretty sure you can see the problem because I do not fully remember what I resolved it to. Eh, just this point, I see what. Okay, so it needs resolves. So I have to wait for it here. Think so. Then necessarily have to include this. But yeah. Okay. So we can refresh this and call that received. I don't think it, but this needs to be asynchronous. I believe the second one is much better than data. Yeah, send data. Trial and error and errors like this. So it did get something. Let me close that. Yeah, so it works. Turns out I just needed to flip it over to the function because of how promises work. So once this is done, we are able to receive data. And if we filter it through GQ, it tells us the owner who was logged in, their repositories, and a lot of information. So we can take this payload and go to issues, create an issue, just an issue, doesn't matter. Create an issue, then go back to issues. I think just wait and see it has been opened. Then we wait for a response from the server because I believe there's a bot that is checking for issues, that is pinging this thing and checking and whatever. But for now, I can answer questions as it runs. I can't even see messages, or maybe people are leaving. I'm trying to finish this as early as possible, I assure you, but you cannot control the timings of bots when it comes to these things. So whatever bot is trying to access, you can just check 40 seconds ago. Usually create space, but from here you can usually see the points that are accessing. So this is my IP. It's just an open port to allow traffic because ports need to communicate with ports. So this is pinging to my HTTP port. So it's just telling it, yeah, this port has spoken to you and it's trying to access this. I'm not sure if this one may take years. believe there was something it was going against the guest queue. I believe that is the issue. I'll just cancel it. There's no need to waste my CPU. And hopefully I get something from this bot. It ran, but there's nothing. I can just put this. It's still the same thing. Trying to replicate the original conditions. But you can see. And I don't see any issue with this. I never did. Sorry. I never checked against the checkboard what my payload will do. It shouldn't do anything. It should not strip, right? Oh, there's something I did wrong that is stripping it. That is why my payload may not be executed. What did I use? This is okay. Or was it will always tell you it's okay, so that first part is okay. Which that's not the problem. Okay. So whatever is here is not the issue. I think it's whatever I'm doing to introduce this to X28 and X29. Validating them. But will this still work? Yeah, so this one can be seen. Let us see this one. But will this work? I am skeptical. Oh, I got it. What? Without mutating this, the original one I had sent. I believe it's X28, X29. Yeah, this one should work. I sent this again, but turned out it was just taking time to load because this one was around 3 minutes ago. I hate this. Okay, I got it. Sorry. So once I got it, we can see. Sorry for this. So we have this point. And we can read into it and we find that we have Charlie telling us that, yes, I have my backups. So Charlie has a backups here within this particular endpoint. And we can, because it's a Git It's a Git repository. We can just go and download it and send it to us. For most of my things, like these functions just do the heavy lifting, and because they do that heavy lifting, I don't necessarily have to worry about that. So I'll fetch a crude file because it's a zip file. So I'll give it the URL. Then, as you saw when I fetched genes, I'm not really sure if it's here. When I fetched genes, it may have been obscured, but gene extension, yeah, this one. All I need to do is apply is give it this part, the archive master.zip. It will fetch the file, then send it to me. With the name fetch endpoint file name. I don't trust it with this, so I'll give it the file name of Charlie backups.zip so that it comes back to me. This has been heavy lifted mostly by the server I usually have on my end. Necessarily speaking, you're supposed to write your own server and then use that server to do things, but mine I just use it for most CTF things. So fetch crude file, then it will send it. So once again, was I here? Yes, I was here. Once again, create a new issue. Should work. Then it will be validated. If I'm not mistaken, every time I write this issue, if it's not correct, then this thing should not be able to be commented. So if I do, that's why you see that I'm not sure, because I kept sending an empty comment. How long is this? 3 minutes ago. It's around 6 minutes ago. It wastes time to receive both things. But we will send. Seems like it had already reviewed or something. Okay. So I'll create the issue again. Yes, issue 6. You should be free to ask any questions as it runs, because at the moment it's doing its own things. It may be executing the payload, but the bot itself, I don't necessarily trust the bot. It needs to fetch first. So it fetches the master zip and then sends it back. I'm waiting for this issue. Has it been validated? Most likely not. By usually the box took me like the better part of 5 hours, because most of the things that I'm usually looking at, I've already done most of them. Cross-site scripting is basically at the back of my hand at the moment. I just have templates. I can paste, move things around. I already have a server. Yeah, it's very like, okay, I've gotten the file. It's a very complicated, yes. When you're doing data exfiltration, especially through cross-site scripting, it is usually very intensive. But you can see here right now, around 26 seconds, or I don't know how many seconds ago, but we have able to get this file because most of the heavy lifting is being carried by my own server from experience. It's a server I wrote from experience and such and such. So we can look into file. We see that it's zip data. So we can unzip it and we tell it Charlie. Yeah, and we notice that immediately right off the bat, we have another file inside. I honestly don't, yeah, Charlie. move whatever is inside outside here so that I see it very well. For me, I usually just unzip it. Nothing here, backup, whatever. Once I do that, I can run tree, and tree will tell me, yeah, you have some things interesting. You have home, Charlie's home being backed up. So we can do home Charlie, and we have an SSH directory, which if we do SSH, we have his key. So we can use Charlie's key. We can use Charlie's key together with this. Charlie, yeah, we can do that. Then Charlie home backups, no, with SSH, yeah. So we can do something like this, and we immediately log in. So we end up with Charlie, but that's not user. It's not even, but we're not that far from user. So we'll look around, then the get credentials. We can just get them if we ever want to go back, especially when you hit something like XSS and that exploitation. We can keep something like this. Remembering that we also had the gene. If you look into who has interactive shells, you notice that Gene, Root, and Charlie are the ones we have. We can try out Gene's password. And yes, now we have Gene. If we list, yes, now we have user.txt. And we have been able to do user. That's quite impressive. Just password reviews on Gene. The next thing I'd like to check is really, let me fix my TTY, is, yes, we have compromised user, and we do sudo-l to see if we can run any binaries. This is the password we used. We cannot run sudo. Because we cannot run sudo, the next thing I usually tend to check is permissions. This user, what permissions do they have? So I look into the groups, I see if there are any interesting groups. When there's no interesting groups, I usually come here, there is something I usually use, this thing. Ignore that. I usually just run it for the sake of it. And it spits out a lot of things, a lot of things, depending on the permissions that you can read. Usually spits out a lot of things, and this is another one of those headaches, because this next step is headache based. I'll explain why. So I'll start off. We've seen that we have the opt driver. We have this, the ungoogled whatever, and all of them are usually running as Gene, most of them. I think quite interesting here. But if we look into the processes, we'll notice that one of those processes running is running the web server, because I was able to note that it was weird because it was running Apache, yet we had seen in Nginx. So to me, it was just weird. Apparently, looking into it, we noticed that it's running supervisor. Supervisor is more when you have multiple. I'll explain how. Supervisor D or supervisor. When you have multiple services you want to run or applications, such that you want to run a Python server on this end, this other side you have a PHP server, this other side you want to run Git, and you are limited to one container, then supervisor is your best friend, as it allows you to run all these services within the context of one process. Yeah, because supervisor spawns individual processes for this, allowing you to effectively manage resources, etc., etc. It really means you are constrained within one container, but in modern day applications, whenever you're doing containers, use Docker Compose, which allows you to span multiple containers. And if you wish to effectively manage those containers, you spin up Kubernetes, which now uses something called pods. which lies on top of these containers, effectively managing them, etc., etc. There is a very lot of information.
By the way, there was a question by
Mhm.
Abdikadir.
Yeah.
Initially, you had mentioned that the server was doing the heavy lifting. He wanted you to give a clarification on that.
Oh, when I mean heavy lifting is okay, normal HTTP endpoints for when we're dealing with hacking, you tend to use Python servers. Something like most people just spin up and do Python 3, then the sham http.server so that they are able to exfiltrate. In some scenarios, you will not be extracting data or checking for ping requests in very small quantities. You will need to extract large amounts of data. My server handles that gracefully because it allows me to send files such that I send this file, then the server itself is smart enough to know it will take the file, process it, and then save it with the correct endpoint. When it comes to sending the data, I tell it you're about to receive data that has been URL encoded and base64'd. So what it does is it will first decode the URL so that it can extract the base64 data from it. So it really expects the data. It has no problem with the size of the data. All it does is expects the data in a certain format. Or once I do that, I carefully and gracefully do that. From there, I can just use functions, calling them with any endpoint from that user's perspective, and then it will send to me the appropriate, how will I say, yeah, the appropriate information that is required for it. So, did we log into this? Do we even have a session? I have a dashboard. Gene never, yeah. So Gene is not, I don't think Gene is an administrator of any sorts. Even if I wanted, that data is locked. So once we end up with this, you should notice that we have a lot of things running. What is this? I never saw this. It's not inside. It's a child process of supervisor D. That means it's running some form of job behind. Yes, even the LXD group is evidence of that. So you can see that these are, yeah, this is where our process stems in. Our Nginx process is spawned 1600. So we have cron jobs for the XSS. We see the Firefox browser, which is why we are able to exploit it. It's a cron job of sorts. There's no issue with that. But I believe this Nginx process that is running is sending us to one of these IPs on the container, such that if you look at container port has been exposed is 80, host port is 8001, and if we were to look at Nginx within inside Nginx, then we have sites enabled, proxies, Nginx and configuration. If you were to read this thing, you'll notice that it's just a default site that handles it. It is the site enabled that contains entries into the defaults. So we have port 80, which is running for mail.snippet. So anything with mail.snippet goes here. Everything with dev.snippet goes there. But where is this thing going? It's port 80, the default server. This is the, like I was explaining it. So it's sending everything to port 8001. If we go above from what I showed you, we saw that port 80 to the container is mapped to our port 8001. So that means most likely the traffic from the snippet.htb, this site, is being sent to a container, especially the .3 within that particular context or whatever. So I think it will be wise to understand a bit on these projects. We have a projects directory, and that is what spewed out when I was running the command for groups. And going inside, you'll notice that we have extension and Laravel. I'm more interested in the Laravel app. Has my internet died? Yeah, so zip recursively app.zip Laravel app, and it would be a very large file if I'm not mistaken because of these extensions. I'm guessing out the box does not want everything compiled at once because of internet is not allowed. Let me see the size of this thing. This is like 15 MB, I believe so. Yeah, it's 15 MB. So we can send it to my server because of habits. Yeah, it's sending the file because of its size. It will take a bit some time. This is 4 kilobytes. This is 15 megabytes. I'm not sure if it's receiving or another. Yeah, so it sent it. So we can unzip this into app source code. And we can look at it inside. So we can just close this. The first thing I would usually look at is the controllers. I am very familiar with Laravel controllers, the Laravel apps, so I easily know where things are supposed to be. But usually app, and then inside the app, the directory is usually supposed to be a .env file, which is used to control or load environmental variables, but apparently there is none that we can see. So we can begin with authentication or no, that's a lot of work. I'm curious with the admin controller because we have not yet compromised an admin, and this is actually where our next step is. So let's look at how this validate email is being called. So with this function, we're being called through it's getting a request object. That means that with Laravel, it tends to serialize requests object. To take this, serialize it, and load it into a class of this nature. So this request object usually tends to have parameters that are usually propagated with the method. So next one of all, it tends to fetch the sec variable. So this is a secret. This is the app secret, and since we do not have a .env, this .env, for example, is not used. It's just an example of how the Laravel app is supposed to be, and usually has an app secret stored there, or app key depending with whatever. So we have a secret. It decodes the email, then it fetches something called the CS value, a parameter from the CS value. So you have something either like CS is this, depending with the nature of, what am I saying? Depending on the nature of the request, whether it's a JSON object or it's just normal form URL encoded. Then it drafts an hash. Now this is where it does something. It prepends the secret to the email. So what you have is secrets, then email coming after. Then it explodes. Well, explodes is more of like split. Split. It's the same thing as split dash in Python. So the email is split. Example A at snippet.htb is now becomes a snippet.htb. It splits on that. Then it fetches the domain, the end of the array. This is the same thing as bool -1 in Python. So this is just fetch snippet.htb. Then it logs everything out. If what we have provided, this is signature validation. If what we have provided is not the same, it throws an invalid signature. Else, it uses the domain in shell exec. This is command substitution. If it's done wrong, it usually leads to command injection. This is just the nature of it, and when done wrong, so we have to hijack this in some form of way, but secret is unknown to us. Sorry, unknown. Because the secret is unknown to us, we cannot forge the correct value. Also, we need an administrator. I'm guessing from either Jim, who is not the administrator, Charlie has to be the administrator within that particular site. So we just need Charlie. So we can come to we can just come here and change reset to Charlie instead of Jim, and the password reset to Charlie instead of Jim. So with those two, we can run reset further. It will run. In the process, we can be discussing how to exploit this. Now, if you're familiar with the family of functions, or if you have looked a bit into cryptography, there are a family of functions, the SHA family. This now details things like SHA-1, SHA-256, and SHA-512. They're usually vulnerable to a form of attack. Apart from that, we also have the MD family, because MD stands for, I believe it's message digest. Yes. We have MD4, we have MD5, I believe we also have MD3, I'm not fully sure. But there's usually a series of attacks when it comes to hashes. One of them is hash collision, where two different inputs result to same output. And the other one is something called a hash length extension attack. This is now where it gets a bit interesting. When hashes are created, they usually use something called trapdoor functions, whereby it is easier to get the output, but it is very, very hard to get the input. That means that someone can do f of let's say an unknown value here. Then I get some output of something to or something. When I try to recover this unknown value, it becomes very difficult. But depending on how data is being used, you can add data to the nature of, you can add data. Yes, you can add data to the original data if you know part of the data, because of the nature of how these blocks are being created. Because when it comes to hashing, they use something called blocks. They take texts. Let's say we have AA, we have BBB, we have CCC. They take texts and splits them into blocks. AA has its own block, CCC has its own block, etc., etc., all the way until what? So it takes this AA, then it hashes it into something like X1. Then it takes BBB, it hashes it into something like X2. Then to get the final hash, it does something like XOR on X1, and then you have something like X2 prime. Then CCC is done with something like X3, X1. X1, let's say it was XORed with 0, because when you XOR something with 0, it's just itself, you just have X1, because this 0 is known as the initial state. When the state is updated, and now the state is made to be X1, so it has to be XORed against the output of that. Then the next one will take X3, it will XOR it against X2 prime, and then we'll get now X3 prime. It will continue doing so and doing so until it is done with the length of the block that is being hashed. Now this is usually faulty in some scenario because you do not need to know what AA is being done. What you're interested in is you've landed at a point, let's say X3 prime. This is a valid signature or a valid state. So you pick up from where you left off. You take this valid state, you come and inject it here at X3 prime. At X3 prime, you add malicious data DDD, then you hash it and you make X4. Then you take X4 and you XOR it against X3 prime. Because this is given to you, it is a valid state. Now, because it's a valid state, it now outputs X4 prime. Depending on the size of the input of the data, you just need to continue with where you left off. You just pick up from where you left off and you continue, and depending with the value or the structure of the scenario, then you have a valid state. In short, you have a valid state at the end, and the signature will always be valid. So the only hindsight in this is that you always need to know what the length of what came before, because you need to know the size of the blocks. You don't need to necessarily know the output, you just need to know the size of the block so that you can create the right states. Such that when it just comes here, because behind this simple explanation, there's usually a sophisticated thing that does with length. It breaks the length of what the text in, and then it arranges some internal things inside the function that is responsible for hashing it, and arranges it based on the length of what came before. So it sets like registers or zeros is this length, whatever, using the length of the data. Because it relies on the length of the secret or the length of whatever came before, we need to know the length. That's usually just the hindsight of the problem that comes with this. So once this is done, we can run password reset. No luck. We will hit a luck. I'm not sure. Run this again. Maybe 5 minutes have elapsed from explanation. Let's just run it again. But that's usually the scenario. But the good thing with the tool I will use can allow us to estimate the length of the secret. So in my scenario, I'll say maybe the length of the secrets. You can do any length, but it's just up to you. We'll sit between 1 and 50, the length of it. So it is smart enough to populate the states correctly and then use the algorithm to correctly set the states, pick up from where I left off, and add the data. The only problem comes with Mason. This I usually got lucky last time. Oh yeah, I got lucky again. I get hit. It's never far because of the probability of chance. But otherwise, let me log out as this. Log in as our dear Charlie. And we have these members, and we have the validate function. So I'm guessing this is what is being passed through the administrator. So once we click validate, you'll notice that it says mail is valid. because from the admin controller we say that it will echo either mail is not valid or mail is valid if it pings the domain correctly. So we have something like post management valid, and we have this. So we can save this request into signature.request. So the selected signature.request. Once the signature is saved, you can notice that it is here because I had selected it. So it will save the entire requests, and then this part is now where it gets a bit quite interesting. So once the tool that we use, it will allow us to forge. So opt, yeah, something like this. And what I would want us to do is, this is the original signature, the value that we have in this request. So this is the original signature. It's called the hash extender. So this is the user, Carlo.snippet. And this is the payload that we want to append. Because we know that from this control that it splits on this art. The thing about it is that if I add a payload, something like a@snippets.html, then I come and do at whatever x, this will be used as a delimiter. So I will end up having 3 items, snippet.html, and finally x. And since it always thinks that the domain is at the end, the domain will be validated. It will fetch my malicious item, the data that I am appending to the end. So we tell it we want to add art, then we give it the payload that we want. Since I use Penelope, this is just a reverse shell. It's a very simplified one that is smart enough to be understood. Then the hash is SHA-256. The secret is the minimum size of the secret is 1, the maximum size is 50. We want the data in HTML format so that I can send it over the request. Then from here now, this is where I will keep all the signatures in signatures.text. I know you're wondering, how does it look like? How does the output look like? It doesn't just, it's normal, I believe so. I can just show you. This normal, this is how the signatures will look like, and that's how I'll be sending them. Then for this other one, string, then I will just write it here, and the emails will look like this. They have to be in a format that they can be sent over the server. So they'll be sent in this format. Because of the difference in length I was talking about, the state will append a series of null bytes to compensate for that difference in state so that the states can be arranged correctly. Otherwise, it will always cause issues. Now, with that out of the way, did I copy this? With that out of the way, I will use, there's a lot of logic that is going on here. So I will come here and close this too, and come here and call this fuzz1 because we want pairs. We need pairs. So fuzz2. Then I will do faf. I'll do requests. Then from this, I'll call base, not base. What is this thing even called? W sig, yeah, something like this. Then we'll put signature requests. Then we'll do protocol. Then the word list is that we can specify. We can tell it for fuzz1, find it from emails.txt. For fuzz2, look for it in the signatures. Then the mode is pitchfork. Pitchfork means it's a pair, just do 2 pairs. Now pitchfork looks how pitchfork looks like. Just images. They usually have this most of the time, usually 3, sometimes what, but they usually come in pairs, like 1 for 1. This one for this one. That's what usually means. So when you tell it it's a pitchfork mode, it just tells go pair. When we want to remove anything with invalid signature, because we saw from this, it will tell us invalid signature in case it misses it, and then we match all. So once that is done, we run the command, and boom, immediately we get back a shell. So it's a bit quite interesting on hash extension, and I hope that is understood. Okay, so how long does it take to gain this knowledge? If you are consistent, 2 years is more than enough, because I only started to get into this around 2023, 24, 2024, from 2024. That's when I became a bit serious and consistent in this. Otherwise, we have this. Once we notice this, I'll skip the almost everything, but when you open the app here, you notice that you have Docker sock, which is run by app. If you do ID, you notice that you're a member of the app group, and if you had run this command, you would still find that, yeah, you can be able to access this. This is just to filter out noise. Usually noise from this directory, so I tell it don't even bother checking in here. So if one day they decide to finish me, they can just put something there, and I'll probably just fall for it. If this thing wasn't cluttered, I can just clean also var. You'll notice that it gives us the socket. So we have some form of control over the Docker socket, but for this scenario, I am a bit tired and I want us to finish quickly. So I'll just check my notes, because I have the commands in my notes at the end. So we have this. I'll skip the things. For me, I used Carl with a bit of help from AI to draft the commands, because it has the capability of listing, telling you what. But this, it is the context of VRun, but us will be using this. So the first thing that I usually did was list the containers. Yeah, we list these containers. And this talks to the Unix sockets, because curl is very powerful. I prefer curl over most tools, because by the time you have to download the tool, a lot of precious time is taken. So once this is run, you just have to hope that you find an image, because with the capability of the image running Laravel, we can be able to create our own and attach it and run commands. That is why for me, what I was aiming towards is we can, yeah, I'll shift a bunch of the commands, but I won't necessarily do it. So I'll do it from here. This is now the base command. This is root key. This is the final product of whatever I was doing. But for me, I'll switch a bit on it. I'll explain. Using the Unix socket, we will send a post request and we'll tell it to use this image to create a new container. Because we need the container to continuously run, we'll tell it to sleep for infinity. Then we mount slash to mount slash host and privilege such that we're able to access it without having many issues. So we're in short telling the Docker container, which is on the other side, the app. There is the Docker service which is running there, and this Docker socket is the same Docker socket as this one, because it has been mounted in terms of volume. So this Docker socket speaks to this one. So we'll tell it mount this host. This host, we want you to mount to the slash mount host within the container. So you can be able to access the host, the main host, from the container by exploiting the nature of how mounting occurs. So once we tell it, we want you to create like this, it will give us an ID. This is the container ID. Now with the container ID, we tell it, we want you to start the container. Yes, I have started the container. Now, when the container is started, you can be able to execute commands. This is now the next command, which will take advantage of that. Using this, we can tell it, speak to the exec module of this and tell it to do this command. So from here, for me, I'll simply come dub, then SSH keygem. This is just this, cut root.pub. Mine is usually a very short key. Very short, very short. So we'll tell the command, I'll change the command, I'll tell it echo this, but because, okay, so it introduces two things. So echo this, close it off. Then I need to introduce another one. I want you to echo it into slash mount host because it's mounted there. Root.sh, authorized keys. Then did I change the container? Yeah, this needs to change. Then you run this. Once you run this, you should be able to get a job. Then this job will be, yeah, this is now an exec job that you can start. So we can just put it there. Yeah, once it runs, it will be able to write to the authorized keys, and depending with the knowledge, we can just do a root, do it root, and be able to log in as root. And that is how you root the box. And there it is, root.txt. And that includes whatever madness has happened. But pretty much that was it. I did not want to take a lot of time. I know that machine had a lot. And it had a lot, very much. Because I was given the background behind it. Yeah, depending with the knowledge, because when I first started CTF, I was playing around with, I usually did cryptography more. I did cryptography more than these other things before I ventured into web and such. So I am familiar very well when it comes to the field of cryptography with most attacks, etc., etc. So when it comes to things like this, if I look at it, I just know this has to be some form of hash extension attack. This can either be hash collision, this can be PHP type juggling combined with hash collision, because depending on the nature of what you're looking at. Now, any other questions? Yeah, I am free for a while. There is a challenge that came out. I want to see which one of my friends has blooded this challenge. You can ask. If there are questions, mad math. There's nothing here. What is? Let me look at activity. Ah, it's my friend. He's really fast. But the DLP problem, so there's no problem with that. Ah, okay. Okay, so any questions? CPT, I have never done CPTS. I have literally never done an exam from the HTB Academy. I don't even know how the parts usually look like, but I know they have good content. That one I can assure you, they have good content. I literally have, because when I joined Hackthedocks, we do not have all these things. We do not have academy, we do not have it was literally the old sites. I used to work with the old sites. Usually just get whatever you get and read. Read from papers, read from sites, read from blogs. There was nothing beyond. You are lucky that you came in an era where you have good things. Because when I joined, there were no such things. It was literally get what you can. I am 21 years old, so I don't know. I am just, yeah. I'm not old. I just 21. I'm 21 years old, so not much. Yes, you may have to. It doesn't. You can do 21. I am 21 years old. You can do the academy. It's so like it's good these days, depending on the content of what you have to do. Because I remember doing the initial modules, and they are really quite interesting. And the way they've been drafted is the sense that they're there to teach you. So I believe like you can do you can do it depending on the nature of experience and such. Mm. But do you have any questions on this machine? Because there was a lot of information. I tried my best to explain it, dumb it down, but in a scenario that you just hope. I'm not sure if, yeah, even the tools that I used, I had to pre-write them, else we would be here for a very long time. Yeah, but I really hope that I have assisted you in any manner of possible. I'll stop sharing my screen and we can, yeah, I'll just wait for Isaiah.